The stars looked peaceful through the observation window of the horizon's edge. Captain Jake Morrison stood with his hands behind his back, watching the swirling colors of the nebula ahead. His ship had been traveling for 3 months to reach this sector of space. Today was the day humanity would meet the Valkyrie Consortium, one of the most powerful trading groups in the galaxy. Jake was a tall man with gray hair at his temples. He had served in Earth's space fleet for 20 years, but this was his first real diplomatic mission. The weight of it pressed on his shoulders. Everything he did today would shape how aliens saw humanity for generations to come. "Captain, the Valkyrie ship is approaching," said Linda Hayes from her station. She was the communications officer, young and brilliant with dark hair tied back in a neat bun. Her fingers moved across her console as data streamed in. "Open a channel," Jake ordered. "Let's make a good first impression." The main screen flickered to life. An alien face appeared. Purple skin stretched over an elongated skull. 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Greetings, human vessel. I am Ambassador Thelen of the Valkyrie Consortium. We welcome you to this sector." Jake smiled. "Ambassador, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Humanity is honored to establish contact with your people." The conversation was polite and formal. They agreed to meet aboard the Valkyrie ship for a diplomatic dinner. Jake selected his away team carefully. Marcus Webb, the science officer, would come along. So would Linda Hayes to handle communications. He also brought along Lieutenant Amy Brooks, their xenopsychologist. Amy was smart and observant, perfect for reading alien behavior. 3 hours later, Jake and his team stood in the transporter room. The technology still amazed him, even after using it dozens of times. One moment they were on the horizon's edge. The next they materialized in a lavish hall aboard the Valkyrie vessel. The walls shimmered with colors that human eyes struggled to process. Long tables were arranged in a circle, covered with foods from a dozen different worlds. Valkyrie crew members moved about, serving and preparing. Jake noticed immediately that many of them were young, very young, children if he had to guess. Ambassador Thelen greeted them warmly. "Welcome, welcome. Please sit. We have prepared a feast in your honor." The dinner proceeded smoothly. The Valkyrie asked questions about Earth, about human culture and technology. Jake answered carefully, not revealing too much but remaining friendly. Marcus took scans of everything with his handheld device documenting this historic meeting. But Marcus kept glancing at the young servers. Something about them bothered him. They moved with mechanical precision, never speaking, never making eye contact. During a lull in conversation, he leaned toward Jake and whispered, "Captain, something's wrong with those children." Jake looked more carefully. Now that Marcus mentioned it, he saw it too. The young Valkyrie all wore metal collars around their necks. Small lights blinked on the devices. When Marcus discreetly aimed his scanner at one of them, the readings made his blood run cold. The collars were neural inhibitors. They suppressed brain development, kept the children compliant and docile. These weren't just servers. They were slaves. Marcus showed Jake the readings on his device hidden under the table. Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. They had to finish this dinner without incident. Starting a diplomatic crisis wouldn't help those children. Amy noticed it too. Her training let her read body language across species. The children showed classic signs of severe trauma, dissociation, learned helplessness, complete submission to authority. She had seen similar patterns in human abuse victims, but never this systematic, this complete. The dinner finally ended. Jake thanked Ambassador Thelen and his team transported back to the horizon's edge. The moment they materialized, Jake's calm mask fell away. Meeting room now. All senior staff. 10 minutes later, Jake's command team gathered around the conference table. Marcus displayed his scans on the main screen. The neural readings were damning evidence. "Those children are enslaved," Marcus said flatly. "The collars prevent normal brain development. They'll never reach full cognitive function. They're being kept as permanent child laborers." Linda had been working during the return trip. "Captain, I intercepted some Valkyrie transmissions. My AI flagged them as suspicious, so I ran a deep analysis." She pulled up the decoded messages. "It's not just the Valkyrie. Child slavery is widespread. Dozens of species participate in the trade." The room fell silent. Finally, Amy spoke. "We need more information. We can't make accusations based on one dinner and intercepted messages." Jake nodded. "Agreed. Linda, see if you can find a Velkari willing to talk to us. Offer asylum if necessary. Marcus, analyze everything we saw. I want documentation. Amy, prepare a psychological profile. I'm contacting Earth Command. Over the next 2 days, Linda worked her magic. She found a Velkari technician named Shelm, who had been trying to send messages to opposition groups within the consortium. Shelm was disgusted by his government's practices but had no power to change anything. When Linda offered him asylum, he accepted immediately. Shelm arrived on the horizon's edge in secret, smuggled aboard a cargo transport. Jake met him in a secured room. The alien was smaller than Ambassador Theln, his purple skin paler, his eyes showing genuine fear and hope. You must understand, Shelm said through the translator. To us, to most of the galaxy, this is normal. Children are resources. They cost less to feed, they're easier to control, and they can work in smaller spaces. It's just economics. Amy had to leave the room. She stood outside, her hands shaking with rage. Inside, Jake kept his voice steady. How widespread is this? Shelm pulled out a data chip. I've been collecting evidence for years. Footage from labor camps, documentation of the trade network's financial records. It's everywhere. 70% of galactic civilization uses child labor to some degree. Some species breed children specifically for slavery. Marcus took the data chip and plugged it into a secured console. What appeared on the screen would haunt Jake for the rest of his life. Children as young as 5 working in mines. Young beings welded into factory machinery. Their bodies modified to perform repetitive tasks. Breeding facilities where children were born into collars and never knew freedom. Jake forced himself to watch it all. His crew needed to see his strength even as his heart shattered. When the presentation ended, he stood slowly. Linda, get me a direct line to Admiral Kane, maximum encryption. Marcus, prepare a complete report. Amy, when you're ready, I need your professional assessment. We're taking this to Earth Command. The transmission to Earth took 6 hours to establish a secure connection. Admiral Peter Kane appeared on the screen, a sturdy man with white hair and hard eyes. Jake had served under Kane decades ago. The Admiral was tough but fair, and he listened without interrupting as Jake explained everything. When Jake finished, Kane was quiet for a long moment. Send me everything. I'm convening the Defense Council immediately. Stand by for orders. The next day, Jake received a message. The entire UN Security Council had watched the evidence. The reaction was exactly what Jake expected. Shock, horror, rage. Humanity had only been part of galactic civilization for 50 years, but in that time, they had seen many alien customs they didn't agree with. But this was different. This crossed a line that humans could not ignore. Earth's government moved quickly. President Victoria Stone, a former military officer herself, personally drafted the message to the Galactic Council. Jake was ordered to deliver it directly to Ambassador Theln. The meeting was tense. Jake stood in the same hall where they had shared dinner, but now his posture was rigid, his voice cold. He played the message from President Stone. To the leaders of the Galactic Council and all member civilizations. Humanity has learned of the widespread practice of child slavery within your societies. We find this practice morally abhorrent and absolutely unacceptable. We demand the immediate cessation of all child slavery and the liberation of all enslaved children. You have 30 days to begin this process. This is not negotiable. Ambassador Theln's 4 eyes widened. Then he laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. You demand? You who have barely left your own star system? You who know nothing of galactic economics or the realities of civilization on this scale? His laughter faded into contempt. Humanity is young and ignorant. You do not understand the way things work. The Galactic Council will not respond to threats from children playing at being adults. Jake kept his expression neutral, but inside, his anger burned white-hot. Deliver the message, Ambassador. 30 days. He transported back to the horizon's edge and immediately sent a full report to Earth. The response from the Galactic Council came within a week. High Arbiter Zoln, the leader of the Council, appeared on a galaxy-wide broadcast. The Galactic Council has received the primitive demands from the human species. We reject them entirely. Humanity has no authority to dictate policy to civilizations millions of years older than their own. What they call slavery, we call practical labor allocation. What they call children, we recognize as developing resources. Humanity's emotional attachment to biological offspring is their own cultural peculiarity and has no bearing on galactic society. The broadcast continued for another 10 minutes, each word dripping. President Victoria Stone stood before the cameras in the UN Assembly Hall. Behind her, representatives from every nation on Earth sat in complete unity. This moment had been prepared for weeks, every word carefully chosen, every gesture calculated. But the emotion in her voice was entirely real. Today, humanity speaks with one voice to the civilizations of the galaxy, she began. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set. We gave you 30 days to end the enslavement of children. That deadline has passed. You have not complied. You have mocked our concerns, dismissed our values, and made clear your intention to continue these practices. She paused, letting her words echo through the chamber. The broadcast was being transmitted on every known galactic frequency. Trillions of beings across thousands of worlds were watching. To those who profit from the suffering of children, hear us now. We will not negotiate. We will not compromise. We will not accept excuses about culture or economics or tradition. The exploitation ends now. If you will not end it yourselves, we will end it for you. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Victoria's image faded, replaced by footage of human fleet movements. Ships emerged from hiding places throughout the solar system. Massive carriers, sleek destroyers, heavy battleships with weapon arrays that made alien military analysts pause their mocking and start calculating. The humans had been busy. On the Velkari homeworld, Ambassador Thelen watched the broadcast with growing irritation. Humans were persistent, he had to give them that. But they were still naive. Did they really think they could challenge the established order of the galaxy with speeches and a few warships? He contacted High Arbiter Zoln. The humans are making noise again. We should remind them of their place, Zoln agreed immediately. I will dispatch a fleet. A show of force should quiet them. The Velkari consortium assembled a fleet of 60 warships, supported by vessels from the Kranoth Empire and the Sindari plutocracy. It was a powerful force, enough to conquer most star systems. Fleet Commander Zorath, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, took command. He expected to arrive at Earth system, make some displays of power, and watch the humans surrender. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. Zorath's sensors immediately lit up with contacts. Human ships were everywhere, dozens of them, then hundreds. Defense platforms surrounded every planet and major moon. The asteroid belt had been turned into a weapons network. Even the space stations were armed. Zorath sent a message to the human fleet. This is Fleet Commander Zorath of the Galactic Coalition. You will stand down immediately and accept Council authority. The response came from a human general named William Grant. His face appeared on Zorath's screen, weathered and calm. This is General Grant, commander of Sol Defense Grid. You have entered human territory without permission. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal or we will engage. Zorath laughed. 30 seconds? The arrogance. We are a coalition fleet, human. You dare threaten us? 20 seconds, Grant said calmly. Zorath cut the transmission. Let the humans play their games. He ordered his fleet forward, intending to move into orbit around Earth itself. That would show them. The human ships moved to intercept. One destroyer, painted with the name Phoenix, accelerated ahead of the rest. Its captain was Lisa Morgan, a woman known for aggressive tactics. She opened fire first, her weapons tearing into the lead coalition ship. The battle began. Zorath expected a quick fight. Human weapons were unknown. But 60 coalition warships should overwhelm any defense. He was wrong from the first exchange. Human weapons hit harder than anything in the coalition arsenal. Their shields absorbed damage that should have crippled them. Their ships moved with precision that suggested either exceptional pilots or advanced automation. The Phoenix danced through space, her weapons carving through coalition ships. Lisa Morgan's voice came over the tactical channel, calm and controlled. Target their engines first. We want them disabled, not destroyed. Some of them might want to surrender. But the coalition fleet didn't surrender. They pressed the attack, confident in their numbers. Zorath sent his heavy cruisers forward in a wedge formation, a classic tactic that had won battles for centuries. General Grant countered by activating the defense platforms. Hundreds of automated weapon systems opened fire simultaneously. The coalition wedge formation broke apart under the withering assault. Ships tumbled through space, their hulls breached, their crews struggling with emergency protocols. The battle lasted 4 hours. It was brutal and one-sided. Human forces lost 12 ships and 3 platforms. The coalition lost everything. Every single warship was destroyed or captured. Zorath died when his flagship exploded, still unable to believe that humans could be this powerful. The survivors were taken prisoner and treated according to human military law. They received medical care, food, and shelter. Many were confused by this. In their own militaries, prisoners were usually killed or enslaved. The humans were different. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. The reaction was shock, then disbelief, then fear. How had humanity hidden such military strength? What else were they hiding? Admiral Peter Kane gave a press conference from the lunar military complex. He was direct and unapologetic. Humanity has been preparing for this day since we first encountered galactic civilization 3 years ago. We observed your societies. We studied your technologies. We saw the rot at the core of your vaunted civilization, and we prepared. He displayed charts and data. Human shipyards had been operating in secret for years, building a fleet designed specifically to counter galactic military doctrine. Human scientists had developed weapon systems based on theoretical research that galactic civilizations had dismissed as impractical. Human tacticians had studied every major battle in recorded galactic history and prepared counters. We learned from you, Kane said coldly. We learned that the galaxy respects only power. So we built power, and now we're going to use it to tear down your slave markets and burn your trafficking networks to ash. Earth issued a second ultimatum. This time there were no polite requests. President Stone's message was broadcast, with footage from the Battle of Saul playing in the background. We have identified 847 facilities across 200 worlds where children are enslaved. You have 14 days to begin shutting them down. You will release all children, provide them with medical care, and compensate them for their suffering. If you do not comply, we will visit each facility personally. We will liberate the children. We will arrest those responsible, and we will destroy any military force that attempts to stop us. The message included specific coordinates, exact locations, names of administrators, financial records. The intelligence was impossibly detailed. How did humanity know so much? The truth was that Earth's intelligence services had been working overtime since the discovery. Spies had infiltrated alien networks. Hackers had breached supposedly secure databases. Surveillance satellites had been deployed throughout the galaxy. Humanity had been preparing for this confrontation from the moment they saw their first enslaved child. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. The chamber was filled with representatives from thousands of worlds. High Arbiter Zone called for order, his voice strained. The destruction of the Coalition fleet had shaken him badly. We must discuss the human problem, he began. Problem? Interrupted Delegate Kirath of the Yalari Republic. They're demanding we stop enslaving children. That seems reasonable. It's interference, snapped Delegate Vren of the Krenoth Empire. They have no right to impose their values on us. The debate raged for hours. Some species, particularly those whose own children were among the enslaved, quietly supported humanity's position. Others, especially those whose economies depended on slave labor, demanded military action. In the end, the Hawks won. 15 major powers representing thousands of worlds and millions of warships formed the Coalition for Galactic Order. Their stated purpose was to defend galactic civilization against human aggression. Their real purpose was to protect the slave trade. The Coalition began mobilizing. Fleets gathered at strategic points across the galaxy. Military analysts calculated that humanity might have a few hundred ships, perhaps 1,000 at most. The Coalition would deploy 10,000. They would overwhelm the humans through sheer numbers. Emperor Krathos of the Krenoth Empire took personal command. He was an ancient being having fought in wars for centuries. He gave a speech to his assembled forces. The humans are insects, he declared. They have won victory and think themselves conquerors. We will show them the price of arrogance. We will crush their fleets, occupy their worlds, and teach them their proper place. And when we are done, we will take their children and put them in the very collars they claim to oppose. His forces cheered. Across the galaxy, similar speeches were given. The Coalition was confident, unified, and utterly certain of victory. On Earth, the military worked around the clock. More ships emerged from secret construction facilities. Weapons were loaded, systems tested, crews briefed. General Grant coordinated with fleet commanders across dozens of task forces. Admiral Kane oversaw the strategic planning. The 14 days passed. The Coalition for Galactic Order refused to shut down a single slave facility. They called humanity's bluff, certain that Earth would not actually start a war over the issue. They were wrong. At precisely 00 hours, coordinated across 47 star systems, Operation Breaking Dawn began. Human task forces emerged from faster-than-light travel simultaneously, catching defenders completely unprepared. Each force had a specific target and a specific mission: liberate the children, arrest the slavers, destroy any resistance. Colonel Ryan Foster led the assault on the mining stations of Kelrath 9. His force consisted of 3 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and a specialized hospital ship. The mining stations orbited a gas giant, massive structures where thousands of children labored in zero gravity to extract rare elements from the planet's rings. Ryan's ships dropped out of light speed, already firing. The station's defense platforms attempted to respond, but human weapons cut through their shields in seconds. Ryan opened a channel to the station administrator. "This is Colonel Foster of Earth Forces. You are harboring enslaved children. Surrender immediately and you will be treated fairly. Resist and you will be destroyed." The administrator, a Sindari merchant named Grolk, laughed. "You cannot touch us. The coalition will respond with overwhelming force." Ryan didn't bother arguing. His ships targeted the station's weapon systems and engines, systematically dismantling its ability to fight or flee. Within 20 minutes, the station was helpless. Marine shuttles launched carrying boarding teams. The conditions inside the station made Ryan's stomach turn. Children as young as 6 worked in compartments barely large enough for them to move. Their hands were scarred from handling raw ore. Many showed signs of radiation exposure. The neural collars around their necks blinked with malicious light. Medical officer Claire Bennett accompanied the rescue teams. She was a calm woman with steady hands, but even she struggled to maintain composure. She knelt beside a small child, maybe 7 years old, from a species she didn't recognize. The child flinched away from her touch. "It's okay," Claire said softly, using the translator. "We're here to help. We're going to take you somewhere safe." The child stared at her with eyes that had never known kindness. Claire carefully scanned the neural collar, working with engineer Paul Stevens to disable it without harming the child. When the collar clicked open and fell away, the child touched their neck in wonder, then burst into tears. This scene repeated itself hundreds of times across the station. Children who had been enslaved for years, some for their entire lives, were freed. The Marines arrested every adult on the station, from Administrator Grolk down to the lowest shift supervisor. Not one would escape justice. Meanwhile, Commander Beth Sullivan was hitting the factory ships orbiting Prax. These were massive vessels where children were welded into machinery, becoming living components of manufacturing systems. Beth had to approach the mission carefully because many children were physically integrated into the ship's systems. Cutting them free would require precision. She brought specialists, including Dr. Nina Scott, a surgeon with experience in complex extractions. Nina had volunteered specifically for this mission, after seeing footage of factory ship conditions. Now standing in the cargo bay as shuttles prepared to launch, she checked her equipment one final time. The assault went smoothly. The factory ships had minimal military defense, relying instead on their protected status under galactic trade law. Those laws meant nothing to Beth. Her forces disabled the ships and boarded them within the hour. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Children had been surgically modified to interface with machinery. Some had their limbs replaced with tool attachments. Others had ports drilled into their spines to connect them to computer systems. Many had been in these positions for years, kept alive by automated medical systems but unable to move or speak. Nina worked for 18 hours straight, carefully extracting child after child from the machinery. Some surgeries were simple. Others were complex procedures that would require multiple operations to complete. Through it all, Nina's hands never wavered. Each child she freed was immediately transferred to the hospital ship, where full medical teams waited. Beth stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the rescue operations through multiple video feeds. Her communications officer reported that similar operations were succeeding across all 47 target systems. Hundreds of facilities were being liberated. Millions of children were being freed, but not everyone surrendered peacefully. Captain Danny White encountered heavy resistance at the breeding facilities on Sorrow's Edge. These were massive complexes where children were born specifically for slavery, bred and trained from birth to be compliant workers. Danny's approach was more cautious. Intelligence suggested the facility commanders might kill the children rather than let them be liberated. He had to be smart about this. He deployed stealth teams first, led by Marine Lieutenant Kevin Hughes. Kevin and his squad infiltrated the facility, using captured coalition identification codes. They posed as inspectors, walking openly through the corridors while their hidden sensors mapped every room and camera. What they saw made them want to start shooting immediately, but they held their discipline. The breeding facilities were organized like factories. Nurseries where infants were kept in automated cribs. Training rooms where toddlers learned basic tasks. Modification centers where children were altered to make them more suitable for specific types of labor. And everywhere, the dead-eyed stare of children who had never known anything but this place. Kevin's team positioned themselves near the facility's main control center. When Danny's ships arrived and began their assault, Kevin's team struck simultaneously. They seized control of the security systems, locked down the facility, and prevented the administrators from activating the emergency protocols that would have killed everyone inside. The facility was taken intact. Over 15,000 children were rescued, from newborns to teenagers. All of them would need extensive rehabilitation. None of them had ever seen the sky or felt natural sunlight. Many didn't understand that they were being rescued, thinking this was just another transfer to a different work site. Amy Brooks, the psychologist from Jake's crew, had been assigned to one of the hospital ships. She worked with a team of specialists to provide immediate trauma counseling. The psychological damage these children had suffered was profound. Many couldn't process the concept of freedom. They kept asking when they would be assigned their next work shift, when they would receive their punishments, when they would be sold. Amy developed protocols for helping them understand their new reality. Simple things like letting them choose what to eat, letting them sleep when they were tired, letting them play. These basic human rights were foreign concepts to children who had never experienced them. The galaxy watched in real time as humanity broadcast every liberation. Earth's Information Warfare Division, led by Cyber Command Chief Patricia Moore, made sure every being in the galaxy could see what was happening. High-definition footage of children being freed, of slavers being arrested, of facilities being dismantled. The broadcasts were devastating to watch. Parents across hundreds of worlds saw their own species' children being rescued. Species who had thought themselves above such practices discovered that their governments had been secretly purchasing child labor. The coalition's propaganda about respectable trade and economic necessity crumbled in the face of actual footage. Public opinion began to shift. The Yalari Republic, seeing their own children rescued from Velkari factories, formally withdrew from the coalition. Their representative at the Galactic Council gave an impassioned speech. We were told this was legal, proper, sanctioned by tradition. We were told our children were being educated, trained, given opportunities. We see now that they were being destroyed. My government can no longer support those who traffic in the misery of the young. We stand with Earth. The Mathara Union followed, then the Talaran Confederacy, then smaller powers one by one. The coalition was fracturing, but the major powers dug in deeper. They had too much invested in the slave trade, too much of their economy dependent on cheap labor. To admit Earth was right would be to admit their own moral bankruptcy. Emperor Krithos of the Krenoth Empire made the decision to escalate. His economy was built on massive munitions factories staffed primarily by enslaved children. Small hands were perfect for assembling complex weapons. His profit margins depended on their labor. He would not let humanity destroy his empire's foundation. He assembled 5,000 warships, the largest fleet the Krenoth had ever fielded. His plan was simple and brutal. He would attack Titan Station, humanity's forward operating base. The station's fall would cripple Earth's ability to project force into the outer regions. Without Titan, the liberation operations would stall and the coalition could regroup. Supreme Commander Krithos personally took command of the fleet. He was confident in his strategy. Intelligence reports suggested Titan Station was defended by perhaps 500 human ships. 5,000 against 500 were excellent odds. The destruction of the Krenoth fleet sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Emperor Krithos had been one of the most powerful military leaders in known space. His fleet had been considered nearly invincible, and humanity had destroyed it in 3 days. President Victoria Stone appeared in another broadcast. This time, her message was directed specifically at those governments and corporations still operating slave facilities. The Krenoth Empire learned a hard lesson, so will anyone else who stands in our way. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to rule. We are here to free children. But if you force us to choose between your sovereignty and their freedom, we will choose their freedom every single time. Behind her, footage played of the Battle of Titan. The images were carefully edited to show the human victory without glorifying the violence. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. Earth escalated its campaign. President Stone authorized Operation Righteous Fury, a systematic dismantling of every organization involved in child slavery. This was total war, but fought on multiple fronts. Military operations continued, but now they were joined by economic warfare, information campaigns, and covert operations. Treasury Director George Sullivan coordinated the economic assault. Human hackers had already infiltrated galactic financial networks during the years of preparation. Now they activated embedded programs. Assets were frozen. Bank accounts disappeared. Credit ratings collapsed. Companies that had profited from child labor found themselves unable to conduct business. The Sindari plutocracy was hit especially hard. Their entire economy was based on financial services, and much of that wealth came from the slave trade. George's team tracked every transaction, every payment, every profit. Within weeks, the Sindari economy was in freefall. Their currency lost 90% of its value. Their stock market crashed. Riots broke out on their homeworld as ordinary citizens lost their savings. Patricia Moore led the information warfare campaign. Her cyber teams released decades of evidence to the galactic public, documents showing which politicians had accepted bribes from slavers, videos of corporate executives discussing how to maximize profits from child labor, communications between government officials coordinating the trade. The releases were timed for maximum impact. Each day brought new revelations. Species that had claimed ignorance were exposed as willing participants. Military officers who had protected slave shipments saw their careers destroyed. The coalition's moral authority, already shaky, collapsed completely under the weight of evidence. But the military operations continued. General Laura Mitchell led the assault on Velkari Prime itself, the homeworld of the consortium that had started this whole conflict. This was not just a liberation mission. This was about justice. Laura's fleet arrived at Velkari space to find it heavily defended. The Velkari had learned from previous defeats. Their orbital platforms were upgraded with technology purchased from other coalition members. Their fleet had been reinforced. They were ready for a fight. Laura gave them one. The battle for Velkari Prime lasted a week. Human forces fought through defensive lines, destroyed military installations, and systematically took control of the system. Ground Commander Alex Turner led the surface assault, his troops fighting through the capital city to reach the consortium's headquarters. Alex was a veteran of Earth's wars before humanity reached the stars. He had seen combat on 4 continents and earned his rank through hard experience. Now he led his soldiers through alien streets, fighting an enemy that had enslaved millions of children. The Velkari defenders fought hard, but they were facing Earth's best. Alex's troops used superior training and technology to overwhelm each defensive position. Within 48 hours, they had surrounded the government complex where Ambassador Thelen and the consortium leadership had barricaded themselves. Alex opened a channel to Thelen. "Ambassador, you have one chance to surrender. Come out peacefully and face trial. Continue to resist and we will come in after you." Thelen's response was defiant. "You have no authority here, human. We are a sovereign government. You are invaders." Alex sighed. "We gave you a chance." His forces breached the complex. The fighting was close and brutal. Velkari security forces used the building's layout to their advantage, setting up ambushes and choke points. But Alex's troops were trained for urban warfare. They cleared each level methodically, using drones and sensors to identify threats before engaging. On the top floor, they found Thelen and his inner circle. The ambassador still tried to maintain his dignity, standing in his office as if he was receiving guests rather than being arrested. Alex walked up to him without ceremony. "Ambassador Thelen, you are under arrest for crimes against sapient beings, including the enslavement, torture, and murder of children. You will be transported to Earth to stand trial." Thelen's 4 eyes widened. "Earth, you cannot take me to your world. I demand to be tried by the Galactic Council." "The Galactic Council has no authority over you anymore," Alex said flatly. "We do." Thelen and the entire consortium leadership were loaded onto transport ships. They would join thousands of other slavers already in human custody, all waiting for their trials to begin. As the military operation succeeded, other species began to understand that resistance was pointless. The Sindari plutocracy sent peace envoys to Earth. They arrived expecting to negotiate, to find some compromise that would let them save face. Foreign Minister Carl Johnson met with them in a conference room at UN headquarters. The Sindari delegates were wealthy, powerful individuals used to getting their way. They came with proposals for gradual abolition, compensation for slave owners, transition periods. Carl listened to their entire presentation without interrupting. When they finished, he slid a single document across the table. These are our terms. Complete abolition of all slavery, immediate and without compensation. Full reparations to all victims, surrender of all individuals involved in the trade for prosecution, acceptance of human monitoring for the next 50 years. You have 24 hours to agree. The lead Sindari delegate sputtered. These terms are impossible. They would destroy our economy. Your economy was built on the suffering of children, Carl said coldly. It deserves to be destroyed. 24 hours. The Sindari agreed within 12 hours. They had no choice. Their economy was already collapsing, their fleet was defeated, and they had no allies left willing to fight humanity. They signed the treaty and began the process of dismantling their slave markets, but not every species surrendered. The Zolari sovereignty, a theocratic state that believed child slavery was religiously mandated, refused all terms. Their holy text claimed that certain species were created by the gods to serve others, and that resisting this natural order was blasphemy. Fleet Admiral Zoln, the same high arbiter who had dismissed humanity's initial demands, personally led the Zolari defense. He positioned his forces around their 3 fortress worlds, determined to protect his civilization's way of life. Vice Admiral Greg Palmer was assigned to deal with the Zolari. Greg was known for his aggressive tactics and his complete lack of patience for enemies who hurt children. He arrived at the first fortress world with overwhelming force. The battle was short and decisive. Greg's ships bypassed the defensive fleet entirely, using precision strikes to destroy the military infrastructure on the planet's surface. Orbital bombardment turned weapons factories into craters. Missile installations were reduced to rubble. The fortress world's ability to wage war was eliminated in hours. Critically, Greg's forces avoided civilian casualties. Every strike was calculated to hit military targets only. Human intelligence had mapped every installation, every bunker, every weapon system. Not a single shot fell on residential areas or civilian infrastructure. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy military capability without harming innocents. This was not terrorism or revenge. This was surgical removal of the ability to resist. Greg repeated this process on the other 2 fortress worlds. Within 2 weeks, the Zolari sovereignty had no military capability left. Their fleets were destroyed. Their fortresses were ruins, but their civilians were alive and unharmed. Fleet Admiral Zoln himself was captured when his flagship was disabled. Throughout the war, humanity maintained strict rules of engagement. Colonel Tracy Bennett led the military police units that investigated any reports of excessive force or civilian harm. When Commander John Blake was accused of destroying a civilian station during a raid, Tracy personally investigated. The evidence showed Blake had indeed fired on a station marked as civilian. His defense was that intelligence suggested it was being used for military purposes. Tracy's investigation proved otherwise. It was a genuine civilian station, and Blake had destroyed it out of frustration after taking casualties in a previous engagement. Blake was arrested, court-martialed, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The incident was publicized widely. Humanity wanted the galaxy to understand that they were fighting for justice, not for conquest or revenge. Even their own officers would face consequences for violations. By the 6th month of the war, the transformation was dramatic. Over 500 million children had been liberated. Processing centers established by Director Andrew Foster had become temporary cities. The war ended not with a final battle but with a signature on a document. High Arbiter Zoln, who had once dismissed humanity with contempt, now sat in a chamber on Earth surrounded by representatives from every major galactic power. His hands shook as he held the stylus. The document before him was called the Accord of Terra. It formally abolished child slavery across all Galactic Council member states. It established enforcement mechanisms, penalty structures, and mandatory reporting requirements. It gave humanity permanent authority to investigate suspected violations. It was a complete surrender of the old order. Zoln looked up at President Victoria Stone, who stood watching him with hard eyes. You have destroyed thousands of years of established practice. You have crippled economies. You have killed millions in this war. We freed 500 million children, Victoria replied calmly. We would do it again, Zoln signed. The document was transmitted instantly across the galaxy. The slave trade, which had existed since before humanity even developed agriculture, was now illegal. The age of child exploitation had officially ended, but ending the trade was only the first step. Rebuilding would be much harder. Secretary of State Monica Hayes led the diplomatic efforts to establish what became known as the Framework for Sapient Rights. This comprehensive treaty went beyond just child slavery. It established basic rights for all sentient beings, regardless of species or age. Monica worked with representatives from hundreds of worlds to craft language that could be accepted universally. Some species had very different concepts of childhood, of development, of maturity. The framework had to account for these differences while maintaining clear protections. The negotiations took 6 months. There were moments when Monica wanted to give up, when the cultural differences seemed too vast to bridge. But she kept thinking of the children in the processing centers, waiting to go home, waiting for a future that was safe. She pushed through every obstacle. The framework was finally ratified by 80% of galactic civilization. It defined rights to safety, education, freedom from exploitation, and protection from harm. It established the age of majority for each species and mandated that children below that age receive special protections. It created an oversight council with human representation to ensure enforcement. While diplomacy progressed, justice moved forward. Judge Raymond Clark presided over the war crimes tribunals. These were held in a specially constructed court facility in Geneva, broadcast live across the galaxy. Thousands of slavers, corrupt officials, and military officers faced trial. The proceedings were meticulous and fair. Every defendant received legal representation. Every piece of evidence was examined carefully. The trials were not revenge, but justice, conducted according to human legal standards and international law. Ambassador Thelen was one of the first to stand trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Testimony from freed children, financial records showing profits from the trade, his own words dismissing humanity's concerns. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Judge Clark sentenced him to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Thelen would spend the rest of his natural life in a human prison, which would provide him with adequate care but no freedom. Similar sentences were handed down to hundreds of other high-ranking officials. Some defendants faced worse. Those guilty of directly torturing or killing children, those who had run the breeding facilities or the modification centers, faced execution. These sentences were controversial even among humans, but President Stone defended them. These individuals committed crimes against the most vulnerable beings in the galaxy. They did so knowingly, willingly, and for profit. Some crimes are so severe that life imprisonment is insufficient. We must send a message that such evil will not be tolerated. Not all sentences were harsh. Lower-level employees, those who could prove they were coerced or had tried to help the children, received lighter punishments or were released after rehabilitation programs. Humanity distinguished between those who had profited from evil and those who had been caught up in a system they couldn't escape. The economic reconstruction began under Coordinator Susan Gray's leadership. She had the difficult job of helping rebuild economies that had been shattered by the war and by the elimination of slave labor. Human investment, funded by seized slaver assets, flowed to worlds that cooperated fully with the new order. Susan worked with local governments to develop sustainable economic models. Industries that had depended on child labor were retooled or shut down. New businesses were established, creating jobs for adults rather than exploiting children. It was expensive and difficult, but it was necessary. Engineer teams led by director Frank Russo constructed schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. On worlds where children had never had access to education, humans built entire school systems. On planets where medical care for the young had been non-existent, hospitals rose from the ground. Frank's teams worked alongside local populations, teaching them to maintain and operate the new facilities. The goal was not to make these worlds dependent on Earth, but to give them the tools to build better futures for themselves. The processing centers gradually emptied as children were returned to their homeworlds. This process was overseen by Director Andrew Foster, who had run the centers since their establishment. Each child had to be identified, their home found, their family contacted if possible. It was a massive undertaking. Many children had families waiting for them, parents who had been searching for years who had never given up hope. The reunions were emotional and joyful. Andrew watched hundreds of such moments, and each one reminded him why the war had been necessary, but some children had no families to return to. They had been born into slavery, or their families had died, or they came from species that didn't have traditional family structures. For these children, new homes had to be found. Some were adopted by families of their own species. Others chose to remain in human-run communities that had been established for orphans. Not everyone in the galaxy welcomed humanity's new role. Resistance movements emerged on some worlds, resentful of Earth's power and influence. These groups claimed that humanity had become the new oppressors, imposing their values on others. Some were genuine opposition movements. Others were fronts for those who wanted to restart the slave trade. Intelligence Director Victor Lewis monitored these groups carefully. His networks, built during the preparation for war, now focused on identifying threats to the new order. Victor understood that some opposition was legitimate. Freedom meant allowing people to disagree with human policies, but attempts to restart child slavery would be stopped immediately and with force. Several times in the first year, human forces had to intervene when slavers attempted to re-establish operations. These missions were swift and decisive. The message was clear: the old ways were gone forever. Anyone who tried to bring them back would face the full might of Earth's military. The children themselves became symbols of the new era. Now living in freedom, many began to speak out about their experiences. They formed advocacy groups, pushed for continued reforms, and worked to ensure that what happened to them would never happen to others. The oldest survivors, now young adults, created the New Generation Alliance. This organization brought together freed slaves from dozens of species to advocate for children's rights across the galaxy. Their leader was a young Yolari named Keth, who had been enslaved for 15 years before liberation. Keth spoke at the 5-year anniversary of humanity's first intervention. The ceremony was held at the UN headquarters, attended by representatives from across the galaxy. Keth's speech was broadcast to billions. We thank humanity for our freedom. We honor those who died to save us, but we also remind everyone, including Earth, that true justice means giving us the power to protect ourselves. We are not victims to be pitied. We are survivors who will build a better galaxy. The speech resonated deeply. Humanity began shifting its role from protector to partner. Human advisors worked with the New Generation Alliance to develop programs run by survivors for survivors. Military forces trained security personnel from other species to identify and stop trafficking. Economic aid focused on empowering local communities rather than creating dependency. Admiral Peter Kane, now in his 70s, oversaw the military transition. Earth's fleet began drawing down from its wartime peak. Many ships were decommissioned. Others were converted to peacekeeping roles. The message was that humanity had not fought this war to build an empire. Kane gave an interview reflecting on the war. We lost 200,000 people. Good people who believed in something bigger than themselves. They didn't die to make Earth powerful. They died so children they would never meet could have a chance at life. That's worth remembering. Captain Jake Morrison continued serving, now commanding diplomatic missions throughout the galaxy. The Horizon's Edge became a symbol of humanity's new role. His ship carried aid workers, teachers, and medical personnel rather than marines and weapons. He helped species rebuild, mediated disputes, and occasionally investigated reports of trafficking attempts. Linda Hayes remained his communications officer. Over the years, she had become one of the galaxy's foremost experts on interspecies